I always thought my wedding day would be the moment I finally felt chosen. After 26 years of being the daughter my mother tolerated instead of celebrated, I had convinced myself that walking down the aisle toward a man who truly loved me would erase every memory of being overlooked, dismissed, and quietly set aside. I was wrong. What happened on that September afternoon didn't just break my heart. It revealed a truth about my mother that I had spent my whole life pretending didn't exist. And by the time the last guest walked out of that church, the woman who raised me had gone from being the orchestrator of my happiest day to the reason I will never speak to her again. The story starts, as most of my family stories do, with my mother wanting something that didn't belong to her. My name is Claire, and for as long as I can remember, my mother, Diane, treated every milestone of mine as if it were her own. When I got accepted to college, she spent the entire family dinner talking about how she had always wanted to go to that university. When I bought my first car, she insisted on test driving it herself before letting me sit behind the wheel. And when I brought my fiancé, Ethan, home for the first time, she didn't ask about me. She asked if he thought she looked young for her age. Ethan noticed it early. He was the one who gently pointed out that my mother's behavior went beyond being overly involved. "She doesn't know how to let you have anything for yourself," he told me one night after she had spent an hour showing him her old wedding album. "It's like she sees your life as an extension of hers." I laughed it off. I had spent years explaining away her actions with the same excuse. She just loves me too much. She's just excited. She's just trying to be close to me. But the truth I refused to see until it was too late, was that my mother wasn't excited for my wedding. She was excited to wear my wedding, to live my wedding, to become the center of a day that was supposed to be about me and Ethan. It started subtly, the way most of her oversteps did. A few weeks after Ethan proposed, I called her to share the venue I had fallen in love with, a small vineyard an hour outside the city with a stone chapel and fairy lights strung between oak trees. I was so happy I was practically crying on the phone. Her response was silence. Then, "Oh, I was thinking more of the Grand Hotel downtown. Everyone in the family got married there. It's traditional." I explained that Ethan and I wanted something intimate, something that felt like us. She sighed, a long, theatrical breath that I had learned to recognize as the prelude to guilt. "Well, it's your day," she said, but the way she said it made it sound like an insult. That was the beginning. Every decision I made for my own wedding became a battle. When I chose a simple satin gown with a low back, she showed up at my apartment with a photo of a beaded, ball gown style that she said would actually flatter my figure. When I picked a playlist of indie folk songs for the ceremony, she created a separate Spotify playlist titled Real Wedding Music and sent it to me with no comment. When I told her I wanted a small bridal party of just my two closest friends, she informed me that my cousin Ashley, whom I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, would be the maid of honor. "But I don't even like Ashley," I said, genuinely confused. "She's family, Claire. You can't just pick your friends. People will talk." The phrase "people will talk" became her mantra. People will talk if the flowers aren't the right color. People will talk if we don't invite your father's second cousins. People will talk if you don't let me plan the rehearsal dinner. I wanted to believe she was just stressed, that her controlling behavior was rooted in a desire to make the day perfect. Ethan tried to warn me, gently, that my mother seemed to be treating the wedding less like my celebration and more like her chance to finally have the big wedding she never got. She and my father had eloped at a courthouse when she was 19, and I knew she had always resented not having a white dress and a church full of guests. "She's living vicariously through you," Ethan said one evening as I scrolled through 100 text messages from her, all of them demanding changes to the seating chart. "But it's your day, Claire, not hers." I nodded, but I didn't push back. I was so exhausted from the constant negotiations that I started giving in just to keep the peace. By the time the wedding week arrived, I had let my mother take over almost everything. She chose the caterer. She chose the florist. She chose the color of the linens, the design of the invitations, and the wording of the program. The only thing I had insisted on keeping was the vineyard venue, and even that I had to fight for until Ethan finally called her and politely but firmly said, "The vineyard is what Claire wants, and it's what I want." It's not up for discussion." She hung up on him. Then she called me, crying, to say that my fiancé was aggressive and controlling, and that she was worried about my future. I didn't realize until later that she was describing herself. The night before the wedding, we had the rehearsal dinner at my mother's house. It was a small gathering, just the wedding party, our parents, and a few close family friends. I was nervous but happy, finally allowing myself to believe that the stress was behind us. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt, for a moment, that everything was going to be okay. Then my mother stood up to give a toast. She started by talking about how she had dreamed of this day since I was a little girl, how she had imagined walking me down the aisle just like her mother had walked her. She mentioned, twice, that her own wedding had been a quiet courthouse thing, nothing like what Claire gets to have. She thanked Ethan for taking such good care of my daughter, even if he has his own ideas about things. There was a tight silence around the table. Ethan's mother, a kind woman who had welcomed me into her family without reservation, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My mother lifted her glass. "To Claire, may your marriage be everything my marriage should have been." Everyone raised their glasses, but the words hung in the air like smoke. I glanced at my father, who was staring at his plate. He and my mother had been divorced for 10 years, but she still found ways to remind him of his failures in front of an audience. Later that night, as Ethan and I sat on the porch of the bed and breakfast where we were staying, he asked me something I didn't expect. "What do you want tomorrow to feel like?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He turned to look at me, his eyes soft. "Not what your mother wants. Not what the guests expect. You. What do you want to feel when you walk down that aisle?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. For the first time, I realized I hadn't asked myself that question in months. I had been so consumed by managing my mother's emotions, by negotiating every detail to avoid her anger, that I had lost sight of what I actually wanted. "I want to feel like I belong to someone," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "Like I finally have a family that chooses me." Ethan pulled me close. "You do," he said. "Tomorrow I'm choosing you. And nothing anyone does or says is going to change that." I fell asleep that night believing him. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain. Soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the window of the B&B like a warning I was too excited to hear. I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the nerves that fluttered in my stomach, the good kind, the kind that comes before a moment you know will change your life. My two best friends, Lauren and Jess, arrived at 8 o'clock with coffee and a bag of pastries. We laughed as we got ready, the three of us crammed into the small room, the rain turning the world outside into a watercolor of gray and green. I felt lighter than I had in months, giddy even. For a few hours, my mother's presence was reduced to a series of text messages I ignored. "Did you remember the something borrowed? Where did you put the seating cards? I'm heading to the church early to make sure the flowers are right." I texted back brief replies and went back to sipping my coffee, letting Lauren curl my hair while Jess painted her own nails a shade of pale pink that perfectly matched the bridesmaid dresses. Around 10, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. My mother, standing in the doorway of the bridal suite at the Vineyard, wearing a white dress. Not off-white, not cream, not blush, which she had originally claimed she wanted because it's practically a neutral, white, lace, a floor-length gown with a train, and a fitted bodice that could have been pulled straight from a bridal magazine. Attached to the photo was a single message. "Hope you love my dress as much as I do. See you soon." I stared at the screen, my heart suddenly pounding. Lauren looked over and saw the photo. Her face went pale. "Claire, it's fine," I said automatically. "It's probably not white. It's probably champagne. The lighting is weird." But I knew it was white. I had seen that dress before, hanging in her closet, covered in plastic, the tag still attached. She had bought it months ago, claiming it was for a charity gala. I had believed her because I was too exhausted to question anything anymore. Just took my phone and set it face down on the table. "She's doing this on purpose. You know that, right?" I did know, but I also knew that if I called her out, if I said one word about the dress, she would turn it into a scene. She would cry. She would tell everyone I was ungrateful. She would make the day about how I had hurt her. So I took a deep breath and said what I had been saying my whole life. It's fine. Let's just focus on getting me to the church. By the time we arrived at the vineyard, the rain had stopped. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting the stone chapel in a soft, golden light that made everything feel almost magical. I let myself hope again. I waited in a small side room with my father, who had agreed to walk me down the aisle. He was quiet, as always, but he squeezed my hand and told me I looked beautiful. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was the day everything would change, that my mother would finally let me have this one thing. Then the music started. The wedding coordinator came in to let us know it was time. My father offered his arm, and we stepped into the back of the chapel. I could see the altar at the front, Ethan standing there with his back to me, his best man beside him. I could see the guests turning in their seats, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the bride. I could see the flowers, the fairy lights, the soft glow of candles. And then I saw my mother. She was at the front of the chapel, standing directly in front of the altar. Not sitting in the front row where she belonged. Standing, facing the guests, wearing the white dress. She was walking down the aisle, toward Ethan, as if she were the bride. I froze. My father made a small, confused sound beside me. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a murmur that rippled through the pews like a wave. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could only watch as my mother, smiling like this was the moment she had waited for her entire life, walked down the aisle toward my fiancé. She reached the altar. She turned to face the guests, her arms spread slightly, as if inviting applause. Her white dress shimmered under the chapel lights. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked, in that moment, like a woman who had just gotten exactly what she wanted. The music kept playing, but no one was moving. The guests were exchanging confused glances. The wedding coordinator was whispering frantically into her headset. And my mother stood at the altar, in front of Ethan, waiting. Then I saw Ethan move. He stepped forward, not toward my mother, but around her. He walked past her without a word, without even a glance, and came down the aisle toward me. The guests parted to let him through. When he reached me, he took my hand. His face was calm, but I could feel the tension in his fingers. "Your mother," he said quietly, "just walked down the aisle in a white dress and stood at the altar where you were supposed to be." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned to the guests and said something I will never forget. "The wedding is on hold." A wave of whispers erupted. My mother's smile faltered. Ethan took my hand and led me out of the chapel, down the stone path, past the vineyard, past the reception tent where the caterers were still setting up the tables. He led me to a small bench near the old oak tree where we had planned to take our wedding photos. "We're not going back in there," he said, "until she leaves." I stared at him. "What?" He knelt in front of me, still holding my hands. "Claire, she wore a wedding dress to your wedding. She walked down the aisle and stood where you were supposed to stand. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And if we let her get away with it, she will spend the rest of our lives trying to make every important moment about her." "But the guests," I whispered. "The food, the everything." "We can't just. The guests can wait," he said. "The food will still be there. But I am not marrying you while your mother is standing at the altar in a white dress pretending to be you. Not today. Not ever." He pulled out his phone and called his best man, giving him simple instructions. "Tell the coordinator to ask my mother to leave. Not negotiate, not argue. Just ask her to go." 20 minutes later, the wedding coordinator came to find us. Her face was pale. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I explained to your mother that she couldn't stay. She started yelling. She said you were ruining her day. She said," she hesitated. "She said what?" "She said you've always been jealous of her, and that if you couldn't let her have this one thing, she was done with you." I sat there listening, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that felt like the end. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Is she gone?" The coordinator nodded. "She left about 10 minutes ago. She took a bottle of champagne from the reception tent on her way out. Ethan let out a breath. He turned to me. "Do you still want to marry me today?" I looked at the chapel, where my mother had just tried to steal the one day that was supposed to be mine. I thought about all the years of letting her take, letting her push, letting her make every achievement of mine into her own. And I thought about the man kneeling in front of me who had just shown me what it looked like to be chosen. "Yes," I said. "I want to marry you today." He stood up and pulled me to my feet. "Then let's go get married." We walked back to the chapel together. When we reached the doors, Ethan stopped. "One thing," he said. "I asked my mother to walk you down the aisle." I blinked. "What?" "Your mother didn't deserve to walk you anywhere. My mom loves you like her own. She's the one who should be standing beside you." I looked through the open doors. There, at the back of the chapel, was Ethan's mother, Betty, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered from the vineyard. She smiled at me, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Ethan took his place at the altar. The music started again, and I walked down the aisle, not toward the mother who had tried to take everything from me, but toward the man who had finally given me permission to stop letting her. I walked past the pews where guests were wiping their eyes. I passed the empty front row where my mother should have been sitting. I passed the white dress she had worn, the dress that now hung abandoned over a chair in the reception tent. And when I reached Ethan, I didn't look back. The ceremony was short. We said our vows. We exchanged rings. And when the officiant said, "You may kiss your bride," Ethan leaned in and whispered something only I could hear. "She's never going to make you feel small again. I promise." I kissed him, and for the first time in my life, I believed I was worth protecting. The reception was not what I had planned. It was better. After the ceremony, Ethan and I walked out of the chapel to find our guests already gathered under the reception tent, glasses raised, cheering like we had just won a war. I learned later that while we were saying our vows, my best friend Lauren had taken it upon herself to explain to everyone what had happened. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told them my mother wore a white wedding dress, walked down the aisle, and stood at the altar. She told them Ethan had stopped everything and asked her to leave, and she told them that I had walked down the aisle with his mother instead. The mood in the tent shifted from confusion to something else, something that felt like solidarity. When we walked in, people weren't just congratulating us. They were hugging me a little tighter, holding my gaze a little longer, as if to say, "I saw what she did, and I'm on your side." For the first hour, I was able to forget. We cut the cake. We danced our first dance to a song Ethan had chosen without telling me, something slow and acoustic that made me cry because he kept whispering jokes in my ear to make me laugh through the tears. We toasted with champagne that tasted sweeter than it should have, and then my phone started buzzing. I had left it in my clutch, tucked under the head table. Lauren grabbed it first, glanced at the screen, and slipped it into her own bag. "Not today," she said when I asked what it was, but I already knew. Later, after the dinner plates had been cleared and the dance floor was full, I slipped away to the restroom and opened my phone. 47 messages. Most of them were from my mother. The first few were calm, almost clinical. "I can't believe you did that to me. Everyone is laughing at me. You've always been selfish." Then they escalated. "Your father is calling me names because of you. I'm not coming to the reception. I hope you're happy. You owe me an apology." And then, the one that made my stomach drop. "Wait until everyone finds out what you did to get that house." I stared at the words, confused. What house? Ethan and I were renting a small apartment. We didn't have a house. I scrolled back through her messages, looking for context, but there was none. She had sent that one in the middle of a string of angry texts, then stopped. The last message was from 3 hours ago. "I'm done with you. Don't contact me again." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. I went back to the reception and found Ethan talking to his brother near the bar. I pulled him aside and showed him the message about the house. He read it twice, his jaw tightening. "What is she talking about?" "I don't know." He handed the phone back to me. "Whatever it is, it's not true. She's trying to get under your skin. Don't let her." I nodded, but the seed had been planted. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother had something she was holding over me, something I didn't even know existed. The next morning, Ethan and I left for a small cabin in the mountains for our honeymoon. I had planned to turn my phone off completely, but curiosity, or maybe fear, kept me checking it. There were no more messages from my mother. But there were messages from my cousin Ashley, the one my mother had wanted to be maid of honor. Heard what happened. Your mom is telling everyone you had her removed for no reason. She's saying you lied about the dress. Also, she's saying you stole money from Grandma's estate. Is that true? I stared at the last message, my heart pounding. Grandma, my father's mother, had passed away 2 years earlier. She had left a small inheritance, divided between my father and his 2 siblings. I had received nothing. I wasn't even mentioned in the will. So why was my mother telling people I stole money? I called Lauren. Okay, don't panic, she said after I explained. But there's been some stuff going on since the wedding. What stuff? She hesitated. Your mom has been posting on Facebook. A lot. She's saying you sabotaged the wedding to humiliate her. She's saying you made her leave so you could have the day to yourself. That's insane. She wore a wedding dress. I know, but she's telling people it was champagne. That you asked her to wear it, that you changed your mind at the last minute and had security throw her out. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Ethan was in the shower, the sound of water running a dull roar in the background. She's also been talking to your dad's family, Lauren added. She told your Aunt Margaret that you forged Grandma's will. I almost laughed. I was 23 when Grandma died. I didn't even know what a will looked like. I know, but people are talking. The honeymoon was supposed to be a week. We left after 4 days. I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's messages, heard her voice, felt the familiar weight of her anger pressing down on me. Ethan tried to convince me to stay, to ignore her, to let the rumors die down. But I couldn't. I need to know what she's talking about, I told him on the drive home. The house. The money. She's not making this up out of nowhere. She's making up everything else, he said. But why those things? Why a house? Why Grandma's will? He was quiet for a moment. What if she's trying to get ahead of something? What if she's planting these stories now, so that if something comes out later, people will already be primed to believe her version? It was a chilling thought, and one that made too much sense. When we got home, I called my father. We hadn't spoken much since the wedding. He had stayed at the reception for about an hour, then left quietly, which was typical for him. He was a man who avoided conflict, who had spent 20 years married to my mother by simply agreeing with everything she said. Dad, what is Mom talking about? The house. Grandma's will. What does she mean? There was a long pause. Then, she's been going through your grandmother's things. The old house, the one she grew up in. She thinks your grandmother left you something. Left me what? I don't know, Claire. Your grandmother and I weren't close at the end. But your mother found some old papers in the attic. She's been obsessing over them for months. Why didn't anyone tell me? Another pause. Your mother said it wasn't anything important. I didn't want to start a fight. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to start a fight. The story of my childhood, repeated again and again. I need to see those papers, Dad. I'll see what I can do. He never called back. A week later, I found out why. My mother had gone to my father's house and taken all of my grandmother's documents. According to my father's neighbor, she had shown up with 2 suitcases and left with a cardboard box. She said they were hers. The neighbor told me when I called. She said your grandmother had promised her the papers before she died. I didn't know what was in that box, but I knew one thing. My mother was afraid of me finding it. That's when I decided to stop reacting and start investigating. I started with my grandmother's estate lawyer, a man named Mr. Holloway who had been practicing in our town for 40 years. When I called his office, his secretary told me he had retired 6 months earlier. She gave me the number of the firm that had taken over his cases. When I finally reached someone, they were polite but evasive. I'm looking for any documents related to my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, I said. And your relationship to Ms. Vance. She was my grandmother. Her son is my father. A pause. I'll have to look into our files. Can I call you back? 3 days later, I got a call from a different lawyer at the firm. She told me that Mr. Holloway had kept meticulous records, but that some of the files from the year of my grandmother's death were missing. Missing! It appears they were checked out and never returned. We have a log showing they were requested by a Diane Vance. My mother. What was in those files? I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents of a client's file without proper authorization. But I can tell you that there was a second document prepared by Mr. Holloway around that time. A codicil, I believe. A codicil? Like an addition to the will. Yes, but without the original file, I can't confirm what it contained. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment, my mind racing. A second document. A missing file. My mother, suddenly obsessed with my grandmother's things, spreading rumors that I had forged a will. Ethan came home from work to find me still sitting there, hours later, staring at the wall. I think she stole something, I said. I think she stole something that was meant for me. He sat down beside me. Then we find it. We started with the obvious places. My mother's house, or rather, the house she had lived in since the divorce, a small ranch on the outskirts of town. I knew she was staying with her sister for a few weeks, supposedly to recover from the trauma of the wedding. Ethan and I drove there on a Saturday morning. I had a key from when I used to house sit for her. The house was quiet, dusty, as if she had left in a hurry. We searched the attic first, where my father had said she found the papers. It was empty except for old Christmas decorations and a stack of yellowed magazines. We searched her bedroom next. Nothing in the closet, nothing under the bed. But in her nightstand, behind a stack of romance novels, I found a folder. Inside were photocopies of legal documents. My grandmother's will, dated 5 years before she died, leaving everything to her 3 children equally. But clipped to the front was a handwritten note from my mother, original in safe deposit box. I flipped through the pages, looking for the codicil the lawyer had mentioned. It wasn't there. Ethan was looking through her desk in the living room. "Claire," he called, "come here." On the desk, open to a page marked with a sticky note, was a letter from Mr. Holloway's firm, dated 3 months after my grandmother's death. "Dear Mrs. Vance, per your request, I have reviewed the file regarding Eleanor Vance's estate. I can confirm that a codicil was executed 6 weeks before her death, witnessed by 2 employees of this office. The codicil bequeaths the property at 142 Maple Street to her granddaughter, Claire Vance, with the stipulation that she reach the age of 25 before taking possession. As you are aware, the original will remains unchanged regarding the division of financial assets. However, the codicil supersedes the will with respect to the Maple Street property. I have attached a copy of the codicil for your records. Please let me know if you require further assistance." My hands were shaking. 142 Maple Street. That was my grandmother's house. The house where I had spent every summer as a child, where she had taught me to bake bread and tend her garden. The house my mother had always called a dump and not worth the taxes. The house my mother had apparently been living in since my grandmother died. "She's been living there," I said, my voice hollow. "For 2 years. She's been living in my grandmother's house." Ethan looked at the letter again. "It says you had to be 25 to take possession. How old are you now?" 26. I've been 26 for 8 months. So the house should have been yours 8 months ago. I thought about my mother's messages. Wait until everyone finds out what you did to get that house. She wasn't accusing me of stealing. She was covering up her own theft. "She hid the codicil," I said slowly. "She took the file from the lawyer's office. She's been living in my grandmother's house for 2 years, telling everyone it was hers. And now that I'm 25, she's trying to discredit me before I can claim it." Ethan's face was hard. "We need a lawyer." I nodded. But as I looked down at the photocopy of the letter, I realized something else. The original codicil was missing. The one with my grandmother's signature, the one that would prove the house was mine. And I knew exactly where my mother had put it, the original codicil. The piece of paper my grandmother had signed 6 weeks before she died, witnessed by 2 employees of Mr. Holloway's office, that gave me the house at 142 Maple Street. My mother had taken the file from the lawyer's office, but she hadn't destroyed the original. She couldn't. Without it, the property would go to probate, and her claim would be questioned. She needed that document, hidden somewhere safe, to maintain the fiction that the house was hers. I spent the next week trying to figure out where she would hide something that valuable. Her house had yielded nothing but the photocopy. I checked with the bank where she kept her safe deposit box, the one mentioned in her note, but without a court order, they wouldn't let me near it. I called Mr. Holloway's old firm again, hoping they had another copy of the codicil. They didn't. The only original was the one my mother had taken. Ethan suggested we talk to my grandmother's neighbors. Maybe someone had seen something, heard something. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. The first few neighbors remembered my grandmother fondly, but knew nothing about legal documents. Then we spoke to Mrs. Patterson, who had lived next door for 30 years. "Oh, that house," she said, shaking her head. After Eleanor passed, Diane came by with a moving truck. She told everyone your grandmother had left her the house. I thought it was odd. Eleanor always talked about leaving it to you, dear. She said you were the only one who appreciated the garden. I felt a lump in my throat. Did you ever see her with any papers? A folder, a box? Mrs. Patterson thought for a moment. There was one day, maybe a week after Eleanor died. Diane was in the backyard behind the shed. I saw her with a metal box, the kind you keep important papers in. She buried it, I think. I remember thinking it was strange, but I didn't want to pry. Buried it. Ethan and I drove to Maple Street that afternoon. The house was empty. My mother was still staying with her aunt, and no one had been there in weeks. The yard was overgrown. The garden my grandmother had loved now a tangle of weeds and dead roses. We went straight to the backyard. The shed was at the far end, its door hanging open. Behind it, the ground was soft, recently disturbed. I found a shovel leaning against the shed and started digging. It didn't take long. Less than a foot down, the blade struck metal. I knelt and pulled out a small, fireproof safe, the kind sold at office supply stores. It was locked, but the lock was cheap. Ethan pried it open with a screwdriver from his car. Inside were documents: my grandmother's birth certificate, her marriage license, a stack of letters tied with ribbon, and there at the bottom, a single sheet of paper, the original codicil. I recognized my grandmother's handwriting immediately. The shaky signature, the date written in her own hand. The 2 witness signatures below, both from Mr. Holloway's office. It was real. It was mine. I sat back on my heels, holding the paper, and for the first time since the wedding I let myself cry. Not for the house, but for my grandmother, who had tried to give me something my mother could never take away. And for myself, for all the years I had let my mother convince me I didn't deserve anything of my own. Ethan sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. What now? I wiped my eyes. Now we see a lawyer, and then we confront her. The lawyer we found was a woman named Rebecca Tran, a no-nonsense litigator who specialized in estate disputes. I brought her everything: the photocopied letter from Mr. Holloway, the original codicil, the photos of the safe buried behind the shed, and a timeline of my mother's actions since the wedding. Rebecca studied the documents in silence. When she looked up, her expression was measured but firm. Your mother has been living in this house for 2 years without legal claim. She removed the codicil from the lawyer's file, effectively hiding your inheritance. And she's been telling people you forged documents to steal the property. She tapped the codicil. This is ironclad. Your grandmother signed it. 2 witnesses signed it. The house is yours. What do we do? Ethan asked. First, I'll send a demand letter giving her 30 days to vacate. If she doesn't, we file a petition for possession and damages. Given the circumstances, we can also pursue legal action for the unauthorized removal of the codicil. That's conversion of property, possibly fraud. I hesitated. She's my mother. Rebecca's gaze softened. I understand, but she's had 2 years to do the right thing. Instead, she tried to discredit you, stole from you, and then humiliated you on your wedding day. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. It's justice. I signed the engagement letter that afternoon. The demand letter went out 3 days later. Rebecca's paralegal emailed me a copy. A formal notice that Diane Vance was to vacate 142 Maple Street within 30 days, surrender all keys, and cease any representation that she held title to the property. It was attached to a cover letter stating that failure to comply would result in immediate legal action. I expected rage. I expected a flood of texts, phone calls, Facebook posts. What I didn't expect was silence. For 2 weeks, nothing. No messages, no calls, no social media tirades. My mother had gone quiet, and that silence was more terrifying than any of her outbursts. Then, 3 days before the 30-day deadline, she called my father. He showed up at my apartment, looking older than I remembered. He stood in the doorway, twisting his hands, and said, "Your mother wants to meet." I didn't invite him in. "Why?" "She says she wants to give you the keys. No lawyers, no court. She wants to end this. She's had 2 years to end this." "I know, but she's not well, Claire. She's been saying things. About the wedding, about the house. I think she's scared." For a moment, I felt the old pull, the instinct to make things easier for her, to smooth things over, to be the daughter who gave in so her mother wouldn't be upset. But then I thought of the white dress, the buried safe, the 47 messages. I thought of the letter from Mr. Holloway, the house my grandmother had meant for me, the years of being told I was selfish for wanting anything of my own. "I'll meet her," I said, "but my lawyer comes with me. And it happens at her house, with the keys and the signed quitclaim deed ready." My father nodded slowly. "I'll tell her." The meeting was set for a Saturday morning. Ethan wanted to come, but I asked him to wait in the car. This was something I needed to do alone, or as alone as I could be with Rebecca Tran by my side. When we pulled up to my mother's house, she was waiting on the porch. She wasn't wearing white. She was in a faded sweatshirt, her hair unwashed, her face pale. For the first time in my life, she looked small. She didn't greet me. She looked at Rebecca, then back at me, and said, "You brought a lawyer." "You brought a stolen house," I said. "We're even." Rebecca stepped forward. "Mrs. Vance, we're here to accept the keys and the signed quitclaim deed transferring title of 142 Maple Street to Claire. If you have those documents, we can conclude this without court involvement." My mother's jaw tightened. She pulled an envelope from her sweatshirt pocket and thrust it toward me. I opened it. Inside were 2 keys on a ring and a single sheet of paper. I handed it to Rebecca. She scanned it quickly. "This is a handwritten note, not a quitclaim deed. It says, 'I give Claire the house.' That's not legally binding." My mother crossed her arms. "It's what she wanted, isn't it? The house." "What I wanted," I said, my voice steady, "was a mother who didn't steal from me. A mother who didn't wear a wedding dress to my wedding and then tell everyone I was the villain. What I wanted was the truth." Her eyes flashed. "You think you're so special, don't you? Your grandmother left you that house because she felt sorry for you. You were always the weak one, the one who needed everything handed to her." I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't react. I had spent my whole life reacting, shrinking, trying to earn her approval. I was done. "You can keep the house," I said. My mother blinked. Even Rebecca looked at me. "What?" "You heard me. You can keep it." I took a step closer. "But I'm not letting you keep my grandmother's memory. I'm not letting you keep my peace. You've taken enough. The house is yours. But so is the truth about what you did. And if you ever speak to me again, if you ever post about me again, I will file a police report for the theft of the codicil, and I will pursue every legal avenue available. That's my final offer." My mother stared at me, her mouth open. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, a chance to make me beg. She hadn't expected me to walk away. "You can't do that," she said, her voice cracking. "That house was supposed to be mine. Your grandmother promised me." "No," I said. "She promised me. But I'm choosing to let it go. Not because you deserve it. Because I deserve to be free of you." I turned and walked back to the car. Rebecca followed, but she stopped at the curb. "Claire," she said quietly, "that house is worth over $300,000. Are you sure?" I looked back at my mother, still standing on the porch, clutching the envelope to her chest. For 26 years, she had used money, guilt, and obligation to keep me tethered to her. I had given her everything, my time, my energy, my sense of self. The house was just one more thing she would have used to control me. "I'm sure," I said. Rebecca nodded. "I'll draft a release, then. If she signs it, she can't come after you later." Ethan was waiting in the car. I got in and sat for a long moment, not speaking. "What happened?" he asked. I gave her the house. He didn't react with shock or frustration. He just took my hand. "Are you okay?" I thought about it. My grandmother's house, with its garden and its memories, would never be mine. But neither would my mother's anger. Neither would her manipulation, her need to tear me down to make herself feel bigger. "I think I will be," I said. We drove away without looking back. The weeks after I gave up the house were quieter than I expected. I thought I would feel loss, maybe regret. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: lightness. Rebecca drafted the release. My mother signed it without comment, her pride apparently satisfied that she had won the house. She moved in a week later, filling it with furniture I had never seen before, erasing my grandmother's presence room by room. My father called to tell me she was already planning to sell it. "She says she's going to use the money to travel," he said, his voice flat. "She's already listed it." I felt a pang for my grandmother's garden, for the kitchen where we had baked bread, for the porch where she used to sit with her coffee. But the house was just walls. My grandmother was gone, and no piece of paper could bring her back. "Let her sell it," I said. "It's not mine anymore." My father was quiet for a moment. "You're handling this better than I would." "I had a good teacher," I said. "Grandma taught me that letting go of something doesn't mean you lose it. It just means you stop carrying it." He didn't understand, but that was okay. For the first time, I stopped expecting him to fight my battles. I stopped waiting for him to stand up to my mother. He was who he was, and I was finally okay with walking my own path. Meanwhile, my mother's campaign against me continued, but it had changed. Without the house to fight over, she shifted her focus entirely to the wedding. She told anyone who would listen that I had stolen her moment, that Ethan had manipulated me into turning against her, that the entire thing was a plot to humiliate her in front of the whole family. At first, I felt the old pull to defend myself, to explain, to prove that I wasn't the villain she was painting. But Ethan reminded me of something I had learned the hard way. You can't reason with someone who has already decided you're wrong. "Let her talk," he said. "The people who matter already know the truth." And he was right. Lauren and Jess had been quietly correcting the rumors. Mrs. Patterson had told several neighbors about the safe buried behind the shed. Even my mother's own sister, the one she had been staying with after the wedding, called me one evening to say she had seen the white dress hanging in my mother's closet, still with the tags on. "She wore it to your wedding," my aunt said, her voice thick with disbelief. I didn't believe it until I saw it myself. "Claire, I am so sorry." I told her I appreciated it, but I was done being angry. The anger had served its purpose. It had helped me see clearly, had helped me walk away. But holding on to it would only keep me tethered to my mother. And I had spent enough of my life being tied to her. 3 months after the wedding, something unexpected happened. My mother tried to sell the house, but the buyer's title search uncovered a problem. The codicil that had given me the house had never been officially filed with the county. Because my mother had hidden it, the property records showed a cloud on the title. No one would buy it without clear ownership. My mother called me, frantic. It was the first time we had spoken since the meeting on her porch. "You need to sign something," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "A document saying you have no claim to the house. The lawyer says without it, I can't sell." I sat in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, and for a long moment I didn't speak. "Claire, are you listening?" "I'm listening." I took a breath. "I already signed a release giving you the house. That's not enough. They need something from you directly, stating you're not an heir with any interest. It's just a formality." I knew it wasn't just a formality. It was my mother, once again, needing me to fix something she had broken. "I'll think about it," I said. "What is there to think about? You said you didn't want the house. I said I would let you have it. I didn't say I would help you sell it. Her voice sharpened. You're doing this to punish me. No, I said. I'm doing this because I'm not your daughter anymore. Not the one who cleans up your messes. Not the one who makes your life easier at the expense of her own. If you want to sell that house, you figure it out. I hung up before she could respond. She didn't call again. I found out later that she had hired a lawyer to try to force the sale, but without my signature, and without the original codicil, which she had conveniently lost after our meeting. The courts ruled the property had to go through probate. It would be years before it was resolved. The house sat empty, the garden died, and my mother, who had fought so hard to possess it, ended up with nothing but legal bills and a property she couldn't touch. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt peace. By the time our first anniversary came around, Ethan and I had built a life far away from my mother's chaos. We moved to a small town 3 hours north, where no one knew our history, and I could breathe without waiting for the next explosion. I found work at a local bookstore, and Ethan started his own woodworking business. We bought a small house with a garden, not my grandmother's, but ours. On the morning of our first anniversary, I woke up to Ethan standing beside the bed, holding a small wrapped box. "What's this?" I asked, still half asleep. "Open it." Inside was a key, a simple brass key, old and worn, on a plain ring. "It's a key to my shop," he said, "but it's also a promise. I know you gave up your grandmother's house. I know that cost you something, but you're not alone anymore, Claire. Whatever we build from here, it's ours. No one gets to take it from you." I cried, of course. I had spent so many years trying to earn my mother's love, trying to be enough, trying to prove that I deserved a place in her life. And here was this man, who had seen me at my lowest, offering me something my mother never had, a home that was truly mine. That afternoon, we drove back to the vineyard where we had gotten married. The same stone chapel, the same oak tree where we had sat after my mother was asked to leave. The staff recognized us and gave us a bottle of wine from the year we were married. We sat under the tree, watching the sun set over the vines. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Giving up the house?" I thought about it. The house where my grandmother had taught me to bake bread, where I had spent every summer, where I had felt loved without conditions. It would always be a part of me, but so would the woman who had tried to take it from me. "No," I said. "That house was never going to be mine. Not the way I wanted it to be. Every time I walked through those doors, I would have seen her. Every room, every corner, she would have been there, reminding me that she took it. I didn't want to live like that." Ethan nodded slowly. "So what do you want?" I looked out at the vineyard, at the rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. They had been planted years ago by someone who knew they wouldn't see the harvest for a long time. Someone who understood that the best things take time to grow. "I want to build something new," I said. "Something she can't touch." He smiled. "Then let's build it." It's been 3 years since that day. My grandmother's house is still tied up in probate, a monument to my mother's greed and her inability to let go. I don't think about it much anymore. The garden I tend now is my own, tomatoes and lavender, and roses that bloom every summer. The kitchen where I bake bread is small, but it's mine. My mother still tells anyone who will listen that I betrayed her. She has a version of the story where she was the victim, the loving mother who was pushed aside by an ungrateful daughter. I used to want to correct her, to make people see the truth. Now I know, the truth doesn't need my defense. It lives in the choices I make every day, the boundaries I hold, the peace I've built, the life I share with a man who chose me when my own mother wouldn't. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong in your own family, like your worth is something you have to earn, I want you to hear this. You are not the problem. The people who make you fight for love, who treat your milestones as their own, who steal your joy and call it protection, they are not your responsibility. Letting go doesn't mean you lose. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to win. If you've ever been excluded by your family, drop her in the comments. You're not alone. Subscribe to Betrayal Files for more stories where truth finally emerges. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know below.